Hi, we're Gabriel and Angelique. Welcome to the AI and Digital Transformation Podcast.
Here at G.M.S.C. Consulting, we sit down with AI professionals to provide you with lessons learned on how you can integrate AI and digital transformation solutions into your company system.
This month, we share our conversation with Ivan Tankoyeu, AI Solutions Architect, founder of AI Superior, and recognized expert in the field of AI applications to aerial and satellite imaging.
Smart cities and garbage collection, optimized farming, and marketing. These are just a few examples of the possible application of AI to satellite and drone imaging. Sometimes, however, country legislation and privacy rules create the biggest obstacle to the development of otherwise very effective AI solutions.
Listen to this episode and find out more about the technology behind it, as well as when and how you can apply it to your sector. So, good morning, or afternoon, or evening to our dear listeners. Welcome to the AI and Digital Transformation Podcast brought to you by G.M.S.C. So, for today, our episode will be featuring AI Superior's Chief Data Officer. He's Ivan Tankoyeu. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly because I'm not familiar
Almost.
with how I can pronounce people's names recently.
Please correct us and give us a nice introduction of who you are and maybe a bit of insight on your past and what brought you to your prestigious role before delving into the topic of today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, my surname is Tankoyeu. A bit difficult, but yeah, also for me. And it's a pleasure to meet you. So thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to be here with you today and tell you more about my endeavor into data science and AI consulting.
Great. And nice to have you with us. And today it's a really exciting use case of AI applied to digital transformation, and that we're going to feature. And maybe you could give us to us and to our listeners a brief overview of the project that you developed, and we can have a general idea before delving into the detail and understanding also what are the hardship behind this kind of projects and what could be the possible applications. So,
yes, thank you. So maybe I'll start from short introduction about myself, about the company, what we're doing. So
of course, please. Go ahead.
I live in Berlin, and it's the second office of our company here. So we are a Darmstadt-based AI development solution provider, and we are focusing on machine learning, data science, and software development for companies who are looking to build end-to-end solutions and products. I hold a PhD degree in computer science from University of Trento, Italy. AI Superior has a lot of different use cases across different domains. I have my own favorites, of course, but we do provide our customers from different domains, from pharmaceutical industry, from finance, insurance. We do provide services on time series analysis, natural language processing, and computer vision. So the most popular request, I would say, lies in these three domains, right? And also core data science. The use cases we are dealing with ranges in different time spans, and they might be short, a couple of weeks building POC, proof of concept, or a couple of years building a full-fledged product, which requires a lot of research and development and software engineering. So the most interesting and potentially most favorite use cases for me are the aerial imaging analysis. So it's everything which deal with the satellite and drone imagery, and this is what I'd like to maybe dive deeper with you today.
Yeah, that is actually a very interesting project, and especially coming from a firm like yours that has experience over a wide variety of projects in the field of data science and machine learning. So, could you maybe give us a brief description of a project regarding the use of satellite or drone imaging, and what kind of value this kind of project brought to your customers?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so among the POC and the use cases, we have detection of trash on coastal zone using the drone imagery. So it's basically detecting of any trash which is coming from the sea, and it can be car tires or wooden pallets, a lot of different types of trash. Then one of the most interesting is evaluation of the risk of damage for residential properties. This is done for risk insurance for insurance company, which is focusing on properly providing the properly evaluating the risk and providing the exact amount of premiums that has to be paid by customers. Then another use case is estimating economic activities based on the satellite imagery. This is for harbors, where you can see amount of containers moved on a daily basis, where you can see how many vessels are coming or outgoing from the harbor. One of the most popular in Europe now is a precision agriculture use case, or we can say it's also agrotech, where the drones are used to do the counting of plants, detecting of weeds, estimating. This can be done with a drone. Sorry. This can be done with a drone cameras, or more global is estimating the field in general, evaluating whether it's have enough potash, which part of the field requires more hydration. This kind of data can be done using the satellite imagery. So also forestry management. So forestry management is also nice use case. We have implemented one to calculate how many trees are survived from year to year, what would be a potential biomass next year, what's current biomass of the tree. So this can be done based on the calculation of the size of the tree. The one project we are working right now is a project which is focusing on. It's a smart city project, and it's focusing on the detecting of trash and in general any type of issues that the modern city might have. Right, so it's a trash infrastructure monitoring, and then analysis of recreational zone. So our customer is a municipality of one of the largest cities in Saudi Arabia, and they are really engaged with us and fascinated by AI, which is allows them to really streamline the process of detecting the issue for a city. It's not only about the detection, it's also creating the tickets, right? So notifying the city authority about the issues city has. For now, we have trained a model which focusing only on trash. So it uses images captured by drone, RGB images. No, we don't use yet a hyperspectral or other types of sensors, but RGB is good enough in order to deal with this problem. We are discussing other potential use cases like analysis of recreational zone, whether the plants in the city park are watering enough, so or they need some additional some additional care. So this is the main focus. Currently, drones are operated manually, completely manually, right? So you have to have operator which is flying, controls the drone, but eventually this is going to be automatized as well. So and then when it's done, it will be end-to-end solution, completely automated, where you would have to, where the city municipality would have the full control on the overview on the city problems.
Okay, that's a very big overview. So I think I'll just do a short recap of what Ivan talked about, like basically the applications for drone and satellite. How do I call it? Detection, like image analysis using drones and satellite could be used in not only environmental applications like saving the forest or monitoring the forest, the trash and so on, and the sea, but also the food production. So like as Ivan said, precision agriculture, so that you avoid food waste as well and make sure that everything goes in working condition. And then as well to monitor the cities, so like the trash and also the graffitis and stuff. So there are these three main applications so far in AI Superior.
Yeah, and I think from the wide variety of applications that Ivan already outlined for us, I can see that this kind of solution has like 3 layers of development and abstractions. First layer is like the automation of the drones, that right now it's not automated, it's performed by humans. The second layer is basically the object detection or object segmentation layer, which is basically identifying in the picture collected by the drones or by the satellites the objects. So if it's object detection, we are speaking of understanding whether there is or not an object in the picture. If it's object segmentation, is understanding where the object is in the picture and how much of the picture that object covers. And then there's like, and those actually 2 layers are not so easy to develop. They require a lot of also data collections. But then there's also like a third layer that I think can be built on top of these applications. And that's, I think, where a lot of application in digital transformation could go, especially for municipalities and smart cities. And that is, once you have that data, what do you do with that data? Is it like you can do prediction models to understand, for example, where you should intensify the rubbish collection because it's not fast enough, or understanding how to a prediction model of how the roads will crack, for example, understanding the evolution in time. So there's really a lot of opportunities there. So from an application point of view, do you think, since you have already built the middle layer, which is like the image detection, image segmentations, how challenging is for another municipality, for example, to start from what you produced as basically a visual model and use it to build something more finely tuned on their needs?
Yeah, very nice question. Basically, it's depend. I would say more on geography rather than other criteria. So geographically, we are working with Saudi Arabia, and their cities are particular ones. So it's there are no snow, for example. There is almost no snow fog, right? And if you are going to apply it to the northern European cities or Northern America cities, it would be tough, especially during the winter. So we would need to do some kind of knowledge transfer, and also I think the cities in Middle East, the city in the European Union, they might have a different problems and different focus. Yeah, so maybe water leakage, or maybe not about the trash, but other problems. Graffiti are less popular in the Middle East. In European Union, it's more popular, graffiti detection on the buildings, while the other problems, cracks, might be more often appear in northern countries due to the weather conditions, right? This kind of use case specifics and also geographical specific might be something that differs and requires adaptation. But in general, if we're talking about the application of the same software for Middle East, I would say that it's more or less easy to transfer. So you don't need to create new models. You can apply the models as is, and then the solution should work. I mean, it's too optimistic to say out of the box, but maybe some adaptation is required. But this is something that we are working on to have a full fledged solution working out of the box with easy transferable to other cities.
Interesting. Yeah, because, yeah, as you said, Middle Eastern countries are very different to the European countries, and as well, I think, in other parts of the world. And so the first thing that came into my mind, because I feel very evil today, is do you have like clients that do these kinds of applications in Europe, and then their first concern is the data privacy because of GDPR?
Yeah, it's basically the main, let's say, problem which does not allow to apply the drone imagery analysis on European cities, right? For example, I live in Berlin, and I've seen the map that almost the whole Berlin is no-flying zone. So it's hard to apply this technology if you don't have on the regulation part the access to collect the data. Yeah? So in some other cities, right, in Balkans or Spain, I guess it's less restricted, and we can apply this. But with Germany city, we need to work on the regulation part to allow this technology. Yeah. But it's an excellent question. So we can also reuse satellite imagery, right? But with satellite imagery, the resolution is lower. It's hard to restrict the satellite imagery, so you just acquire the satellite images from providers. It's actually one of the best satellite imagery is European, from France and Germany, Airbus. But this is something that, yeah, it's a good question about the privacy.
And do you think the European legislative structure is aware of the potential that using this kind of data could bring to the table, to the benefit that could give to the European population? Because I don't see a really strong problem from a technological point of view. I mean, blurring, for example, the faces or the people is not really an issue nowadays with the available technology. So are you aware of any progress from the legislative part? And are we gonna be able to use these kind of technologies in Europe as well, or we're forced to give the benefits to other countries?
I mean, I think we are currently too small to fight with legislation, and we are part of a German AI association, and we try to also convince the government. And I think it's already started to doing some necessary step towards this, especially in AI with drones, and especially for this use case. It's not about people who are looking into the images and looking into the faces of other people. It's AI, right, who doesn't care about people. It's trained to detect trash, and this is the only trash is what model is trained. Of course, there should be some kind of restrictions, right? from legislation, but being a part as a citizen of Germany, I'm happy to have this kind of legislation. As a AI expert and the co-founder of AI company, this is hard to you know hard to understand, understandable, but it's to some extent also not really support the business and the technology development.
Yeah, I would say like it's important to stress for the listeners, hoping that some government official will listen to this podcast. That's also our hope, that they should understand that the process that from the image yields the data, it's completely inside the box. So there's no need for a human operator to ever see the image. Like the image that it's stored and for further processing or for human analysis, it's really completely denaturated of any sensitive data. So it is really possible to make it completely GDPR compliant. There's
yes.
yeah, what's lacking maybe it's really the will to adopt the legislation, but it's to make it work because there's no real problem out there. What do you think?
It could work, but then I also noticed, I think you also noticed that there's a rising distrust between the people and the government. So the people would think that this could be like a conspiracy using their data. Like, for example, this could be used in a way that you could monitor riots.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
And so you run the risk of avoiding political movements because of that. And well, every country has its own rules. We're not really a political podcast, but this is some risk that I thought could take place if governments don't think about it very well. So it's like a 1984 kind of thing. So my question is like, how do you deal with this? Like, what kind of stakeholders do you work with for these kinds of projects, and like, what kind of questions do you ask them? Like, what do they need to think of before initiating the project? Because some would think, oh, it's so cool, and then they don't know what happens next.
Yeah. I mean, in any project, not only in this one, but in any project, it's about the return on investment, right? So you have to evaluate the return on investment for any AI project. I mean, for any project when you talk with the business stakeholders. This return on investment can be also estimated not in real money or real values, right? Monetary values, but also reputational, right? And for example, Middle East country are able to, let's say, invest a bit more, but they would have a more reputational gain, and they speed up, let's say, technological advances, while the countries which, let's say, forbid certain technologies due to some reasons might be then be in position of followers, right? Which is not so good. Maybe one thing about the overall models, right? This is not. You still need to a human who would do the annotation. You would need before running the model, working model, you have to do the annotation, and this annotation is usually done by a human. You can somehow, do the training with synthetic data and so on and so forth, but the quality of the model might not be so good. This is coming back a bit to the question of Gabriele about the, let's say, closed box. So it's not completely closed. You still have to look into the data, at least in the beginning, right?
Yeah, probably during the first phase. But this leads me to the next question. Since your company, or maybe you're aware of other companies that are your competitors, for example, invested so much on the image analysis layer, and which is not just a segmentation, it's also how to merge all the images into a single map during the tessellation when it's needed and so on. is there any chance to access, for example, this data with some API, maybe doing some fine tuning, like it happens, for example, in the case of NLP, where we have these huge language model that are trained maybe by OpenAI or some big corporations. But then if a small municipality, for example, wants to use them, doesn't need to involve OpenAI, but they can just use their API for the first layer, and then they can build their second layer, which is also a layer where there's a lot of communication with the stakeholders, where the UX and the data interaction is really important, and it's very domain specific as well.
Wait, hold on. Since I'm not sure all our listeners know, what does API mean?
Yeah, okay. API means that it's basically an interface where I can use a piece of code, a piece of program that someone else developed without including this code into my application. So this would be a way for company X to use Ivan's code without actually installing this code into their application, and just giving Ivan's a small fee for the usage of their application. So it's basically software as a service interface. And sorry, sometimes I forget because it's so natural for us, but it's good because we explain these details because we really want this communication to reach everybody and not just tech people.
Coming back to the question, so usage of API, and in general, software as a service is one of the, business model which we would like to employ to further working with the customers. So this is basically the business model which is, fair, and then it also allows to have sustainable growth for a company, right? Because from project to project development, it's hard to scale. While with a software as a service business model, you can scale non-linearly, right? So basically, exponentially.
Yeah. And me as a very small, for example, company, I might think of using this kind of API to pitch a solution to my municipalities, or to some municipalities in Italy, for example, that have a big issue with, for example, rubbish collection. Like I can think of several very problematic cases, but I would never think, given our size, to build the image model that requires so much expertise on image merging, on so much resources and labeling. So, and I think like our company, also a lot of other small companies would really benefit from the access to the output of the image processing layer. So I really hope you can make it available as an API in the future.
Scaling. It could be practical, for some people. But I had just had a thought, who is in charge? Is it you guys, or is there a third party, or is it the municipality, or whoever is the client? Or is the one who grants or looks for access for satellite and drone services? I think that's also something.
Who accesses the data? Who provides?
Who is responsible for accessing this stuff, and then who is responsible for verifying the quality of the data? Because the data, the value of the data is different for each use case. For example, the one on farming, you have to be somehow an expert on farming. The one on forest, you have to be somehow an expert on forestry.
Maybe I think the question is, translating into machine learning terms, the question is, what are the challenges related to the data collection process, especially when you need to involve specialists from other disciplines for the labeling of the data? What kind of challenges do you face, and what kind of challenges in general are potential future customers of yours gonna face with regarding the data collection and labeling?
So basically, the main challenge is to maintain high quality of data which you're collecting, right? So the data collection process for drones, right? It requires some specific specific guidelines to be followed, right? So, for example, we expect that customer is flying 50 meters above the ground. It has a specific camera. The camera position is 90% towards the ground and 90 degree towards the ground. So, and there are other requirements which we provide in order to do during the data collection to our partners who are doing this. With respect to satellite imagery, there are no requirements. So you have satellites which are flying on the geo 500 kilometers above the ground, right? And they are collecting. For example, I know Airbus Neo, Pleiades Neo collects 2.2 million square kilometers per day. The access, yes, of course, it's restricted, and you have to buy it from the official providers of this data. But basically, I think majority of European company organization can buy it, or international, even internationally, because the quality is 0.3 meter of resolution. It doesn't violate, the privacy. You don't see people with this quality. I mean, you might see if the person has a shadow, right? But in general, it's hard to see with this quality people. But basically, if we're talking about the access to it, people have access to Google Map services, right? And they're using with a similar resolution. So Google Maps are mostly using the Maxar. It's a US provider of satellite imagery data, and the quality is similar. So if we are talking about the American cities, the quality is really stunning for satellite imagery, and access is everyone is can see the satellite images and browse the world using the Google Maps, Google satellite imagery.
Yeah, I think this is also a point that's good to stress, that especially with the usage of satellite images, it really depends on the constellation of satellites that are available in the area you're interested into. So it's not the same everywhere, and because the satellites cover different areas of the world with different accuracy, and that's why some countries like Japan or also Russia, they have their own satellite constellation that focuses on their country, of course, because that's what they are interested into. So but and regarding the data labeling, what are the common challenges? Like you need to, I think, in some cases, like for example, for forest or when you need to identify rare species of plants, for example, you need to involve specialists. So that is a challenge. How do you face that? And also, how do you manage the life cycle of this kind of AI product regarding the obsolescence of the model? Because, like, for example, if the model has to detect cars, and cars are going to evolve in time, so at some point the performance of the model is going to degrade by a factor at least. So those would be my two questions. So like challenges regarding data labeling and involvement of professionals, and the life cycle, like how should be managed.
The challenges for data labeling are standard. I think everyone in the industry has it. So you basically have to either find the data set with permissive license to train your network, right? Or partially train it then to use then transfer learning to do the semi-automated labeling, right? But in general, it's a standard approach. So we have professionals, dedicated professionals, laborers who are curated by data scientists, and based on the it's not an active learning approach, but basically it's a semi-automated approach of labeling. So you label some part of the data, train the model, you then annotate with the model some part of the data, and this is fixed by labelers. And then until you iterate in such a way until you are done with your KPIs, until you met your KPIs, whatever they are, like accuracy or precision recall, MOU. So it depends on the business problem.
Yeah, so as a note for our listeners, we mentioned transfer learning, and this is basically when we use a pre-trained AI model, and we try to use its expertise on a new domain. So we transfer the knowledge from a closed domain to this domain. So maybe a model that's already good at doing image segmentation or object detection on objects that maybe do not include rubbish. And then we start from them and use it to create in a much faster way a model that can detect rubbish in the street. So this is very important to reduce the cost of these models, and that's what's making AI so accessible nowadays compared to, I don't know, just 5 or 6 years ago, where it was much harder to find good models to do transfer learning from. So it's that's a huge step. That's a huge step forward, and of course it can be a bit more challenging where you need a professional. Like, for example, this is not the case with satellite imager, but sometimes when you need, for example, when you label medical data, you need to involve doctors, and so reduce their commitment is really one of the critical components of making this project successful. So that's really interesting. Yeah. So
Hold on. I think the life cycle was that answered.
Yeah. The life cycle. Yeah. How do you monitor, and how can we monitor the performance of the model in time? Do you need to constantly interact with the customer, or is the customer that comes to you and asks you to review the model because they see the performance degrading?
So it depends again on the use case. So, for example, if the results should be, let's say, one-time results, and you share with the customer report, then you claim your performance of the model, right, in terms of accuracy or understandable by customer KPIs. If the customer requires, let's say, if you sign SLA, service level agreement with the customer, then you expect that customer expect you to curate the model, maintain it, and improve further. Because dealing with the satellite imagery, it's also a dynamic field where the trees are growing, and then trees which were quite small, or plants were quite small, they are changing over time, and then you have to adapt a model to be able to detect it, measure the size, and so on and so forth. And in this case, you follow the standard guidelines. So you control your performance based on your metrics, and you arrange a person who is taking care of it, right? And over time, keep an eye on the model performance. Yeah. So it's also known sometimes as a data drift problem, right? When you have to make sure that the distribution is the same.
Yeah. Of course, and it is true. However, at least in my experience, that sometimes the customer doesn't really know what they want. So they need to be guided in defining the KPIs, and also in terms of service level of agreements. So because they all require some metric to define what is good and what is bad, and sometimes it's not always so easy to find a stakeholder on the customer side that really is able to ask the right question, to define the right metrics. And so it's another way to ask you, do you have to guide the customer in this process sometimes of defining the KPIs, or that never happened to you? And maybe in Germany, like, customers are all very tech aware, and they're already know what they want, because at least in Italy it happens very often that we need to guide the customers in defining the KPI as well. So it's more an iterative process there too.
I think it's internationally. So I mean, it depends on the customer maturity and understanding of AI. We are sometimes, of course, when you deal with customers who are, for example, head of data science unit in a corporate organization, you don't need to explain what's precision recall or other metrics. When you deal with startups and some inventors who are coming to you, then you have to provide the explanation, and also you have to manage the expectations, right? So that this KPI is important to this and this, and you also need some kind of understanding from a customer whether he or she is interested in recall or precision, right? So different metrics you define together with the customer KPI, which reflects their business goals. You explain them, and then you try to speak with the customer on his language. So yeah, it's a collaborative approach. So there is no let's say bulletproof approach. So you sometimes have to help a customer to understand.
Yeah, so to summarize and wrap it up, I would say that if any of you listeners or watchers would like or think your institution or company would like to implement this kind of solution, don't be scared about data privacy. At least don't be too much scared, because usually there's a lot of leeway on how to handle it. There are a lot of options that depend on what you want. So if there are constraints to a good extent, they can be the solution can be adapted to satisfy those constraints. And also, if you don't really know what you want, don't feel too scared to reach out to AI consultants or companies that are specialized in AI solutions, because they can guide you through understanding exactly what you need and define together what are the KPIs, so the key performance indexes of the solutions that guide you. So don't feel shy to ask, and usually companies, as I'm sure Ivan will confirm, are very happy to hear from you and discuss the use case that you would like to develop together to understand together exactly what you want and what you need.
Yeah.
So that's also important. And I think we covered a lot of points. So would you like to add anything, Ivan, before the closing?
No, I think we covered majority of all the items. And I was happy to join you to this podcast. I appreciate your time and the interest to my person.
Thank you. It was so nice to have you here as well.
So the last question.
So the last, let's say, funny questions that we like to complete our episodes with is:
Can you suggest like a book that people could read, like something you like or something on AI and digital transformation that you could recommend for our listeners?
Yeah, but not necessarily. I mean,
could be fun.
Yeah. I can say one book which I'm reading now, but again, it's it's less about AI rather than product. I think AI professionals should think in terms of products and people needs, and therefore I would recommend one of the book which called Obviously Awesome: How to Nail Product Positioning to Customer, Get It, Buy It, and Love It. But it's more about the product development, which I'm now interested in due to our, let's say, endeavor in the space of product creation from AI solution. And
it's still important.
Yeah, still very important. Thanks for the advice, and thank you again for being here with us and for sharing your use cases that I think are very useful, and many other companies or institutions might benefit from this kind of solution.
So if you guys like our podcast, you could try to share this with your other friends or colleagues. And of course, if you want to contact Ivan and reach out to AI Superior, We will be providing his contact details in the show notes. So don't be shy, people.
Yeah, reach out. Thank you again, and
Thank you.
hope to hear from you soon. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.